The email subject line hit like a tax audit on a Friday. Mandatory attendance. Napa weekend CEO family celebration. In corporate lingo, that meant cancel your life, pack something pastel, and pretend to care. I gaped at my screen, rereading mandatory 3 times, praying it was a joke. The CEO's wife, Melanie, who once said interns should earn their air, was turning 49. Again. They'd rented a vineyard, flown in the board, and scheduled a mindfulness brunch with a has-been sitcom star selling turmeric wine. But I had a choice, and I made it. My little sister, Lena, was escaping her husband that weekend. 3 years of misery in a house with boarded windows, vanished paychecks, and a man whose love came with bruises. We'd planned her getaway for months. I was her driver, her safe space, the flashlight when she grabbed birth certificates and her dog's ashes. So I replied, I can't make it. Family commitment. That was Thursday. By Friday, HR called, their tone sugar over arsenic. We just wanted to confirm your RSVP. Attendance is part of our leadership culture. I repeated myself, I won't be attending. I'm helping my sister leave an abusive situation. There was a pause, a tight thank you, and a dial tone. Monday morning, 9:03 a.m., I got the calendar invite, 10-minute sync, CEO's office. I didn't even sit. I stepped into the office and immediately felt the drop in barometric pressure. He didn't look up, just signed a piece of paper and slid it across the desk like it was a dry cleaning receipt. You don't show up for family, he said, smiling like a car salesman with a felony record. You're not family. I blinked. Excuse me. You know how we operate here. Culture is king. Team players show up, especially when it matters. You made your choice. This is ours. 8 years. I gave them 8 years from the first line of JavaScript on their public site to secure integrations for their Fortune 100 clients. I flew coach to Berlin for emergency installs, slept under my desk during Black Friday outages, covered for the CTO when a side project nearly broke our compliance, sent birthday cards to the CFO's twins, baked gluten-free brownies for Karen in accounting after her cat died. But I didn't toast Melanie over lavender mimosas in Napa. So I was out, no severance, no bonus, just a cold security guard named Mike escorting me to the elevator like I'd pocketed trade secrets or left my zipper down at a board meeting. You know the sick part? I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. Because the second he slid that termination letter toward me, I remembered something buried. Schedule E. 3 months prior, after a panicked leadership reshuffle, I had quietly proposed a suite of fail-safe protocols designed to protect the system from rogue deployments and internal breaches. Executive sign-off was slow, so I embedded them as passive watchdogs, technically reversible only by someone with full architect-level access, someone like me. The second they fired me without due process or offboarding, the clock started. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I planned for stupidity. As I stood there watching Mike press the elevator button, I felt nothing but clarity. They broke their own protocol by removing me without a transition window. That wasn't a fire. That was a spark. And Schedule E? It wasn't angry. It was patient. It wouldn't destroy. It would wait for dependencies to unravel, for tokens to expire, for someone to try and brute force the system with all the grace of a toddler with a crowbar. As the elevator doors closed, Mike gave me a nod. Tough break, he said. I didn't reply. I just reached for my phone, opened the admin console on my personal cloud key, and tapped a string I hadn't touched since March. The interface pulsed once. No fireworks, no drama, just one simple status line. Schedule E status. Passive monitoring enabled. I took a deep breath. Now we wait. Mike didn't say a word as we passed the glass cubicles. Just that slow, awkward march down the spine of the floor. Coworkers suddenly fascinated by spreadsheets, coffee mugs, the wall. No one made eye contact, not even Marcus from DevOps, who I once helped hide a failed patch so he wouldn't lose his weekend bonus. HR must have briefed them. Or maybe they didn't have to. The silence spoke volumes. She's done. Don't get it on you. They didn't give me time to gather my thoughts, let alone my files. My work bag was already zipped up and placed neatly beside my desk like a donation box. I asked if I could quickly review a few personal directories. Mike said, nope, protocol. Funny, they cared about protocol now, but protocol works both ways. Removing a lead system architect without a handover session, without a revocation process? That's not just reckless, it's a compliance nightmare waiting to mold. The screens were still on. I glanced at my terminal one last time, and there it was, like a ghost blinking in plain sight. Protocol initiated, dormant. A line tucked quietly beneath some cron job logs, obscure, unthreatening. Is everything good? Mike asked, eyeing the screen like it might explode. Yep, I said, just making sure the doors are locked behind me. He didn't get the metaphor. We passed the server hallway. I could hear the low hum behind the locked steel doors, my hum. That sound had been my heartbeat for 8 years. I knew the config whispers, the memory bleeds, the exact second the load balancer coughed on Tuesdays. I built that stack like a cathedral, line by line, knowing every flaw and strength. Now I was a stranger in the house I designed. HR gave me a manila envelope with my offboarding materials, 2 sheets of paper, no farewell note, no thanks, no box of stale cookies with a paper plate that said, good luck, in Sharpie. Just the cold formality of a company terrified of admitting it made a mistake. I signed nothing, said nothing, because Schedule E was never designed to hurt anyone. It was a guardian, a paranoid and blinking eye that only opened when something was wrong, when trust was broken. And that's what they did. They didn't just fire me. They removed the human firewall and threw open the gates to people who didn't understand the blueprints, who hadn't been there at 3 a.m. during a server flood, who didn't know why the third-party integration keys had to be rotated every 28 days. Like moon phases. I entered the elevator. Mike hit the ground floor. The ride down felt like a funeral with bad music. I stared at the blinking floor numbers like they were counting down to an alternate version of me, one that didn't play office politics, didn't say yes to every fire drill, didn't believe that loyalty would protect her from the next pivot. Floor 8. Floor 7. I thought about Melanie's birthday cake, 3 tiers, gluten-free, gold-dusted, and probably vegan, just so no one could blame her for her personality. Floor 6, I thought about Lena, asleep on my couch, arms wrapped around her dog's ashes in a shoebox. Floor 4, I thought about Schedule E. When I first proposed it, the CTO called it overkill. But I knew better. I'd seen what a single misplaced permission could do, the kind of domino chain that starts with a revoked API and ends with litigation. Schedule E was my insurance policy, passive, encrypted, silently embedded in the same legacy shell they never bothered to patch. Floor 2. They fired me with no clue that half their environment still needed a key only I could provide. And now that key had been quietly locked, not in vengeance, but in protocol. The elevator chimed as the doors began to close behind me. I leaned in ever so slightly and whispered toward the panel, like it could hear me, activate contingency. Outside, the sun was too bright. My inbox was already deactivated, my Slack profile set to disabled, but I still had my phone. I still had access to my encrypted mirror logs. I still had the notarized documentation I had emailed to my personal counsel 3 weeks ago, labeled in case of termination, no cause. And I still had time, because Schedule E was patient. It didn't break things. It waited for the moment they would. By the time their morning stand-up wrapped, the first splinters had already started to show, a minor alert from the health check dashboard, a latency spike on client auth verification. A nothing burger on paper, just a hiccup on an endpoint. We usually bragged about 99.999% uptime, thanks to careful redundancy. Someone logged a Jira ticket. Tier 1 support flagged it. The CTO, Chad, shrugged it off like dandruff. Probably an autoscaler hiccup, he said through a yawn, already halfway into his second cold brew. Except that hiccup wasn't random. It was the first tendon tearing loose. 3 hours later, our West Coast retail partner, massive, vocal, painfully high maintenance, called their account manager in a panic. Your gift card validation's not working. It's rejecting real codes. 10 minutes after that, our analytics layer threw a fit. Report generation locked up mid-query. Not crashed, not burning, just paused, like a dog unsure if its owner was coming home or not. That's how Schedule E worked, quietly, incrementally. It didn't attack the system. It just stopped trusting it because trust was the design philosophy. That was always the line I pushed. We don't build walls. We build gates with smart locks, access that depended on roles, on clean transitions, on continuity. And when they removed me without clean succession, that access dissolved. It's not that I booby-trapped the system. I architected it for stability, assuming people wouldn't be stupid. But corporate ego is a hell of a drug. By 2 p.m., engineering tried to run a manual override on the job orchestrator, a routine fix that should have worked, but they hit a wall. One of the admin shells needed two-factor authentication from an account that no longer existed. Mine. It had been deactivated, not transferred. Someone in IT probably thought they were being thorough, check the box, close the loop. But what they did was sever the only tether between the orchestrator and its own heartbeat. The system froze, not dramatically, not instantly, but like a man having a stroke while still trying to make a sandwich. Task queues ballooned. Staging environments dropped out of sync. The CTO issued a Slack message. Anyone have eyes on the dependency tree for the token manager? Silence. Then one brave engineer typed, I think that was mapped under legacy access 06. Wasn't that her stack? More silence. I was watching from my couch, not logged in, just sipping tea and scrolling through industry Slack leaks and public Jira tickets our clients loved to overshare. I knew what they'd try next. Reset some configs, spin up a parallel environment, ping the failovers. But those failovers weren't configured to sync without my deployment key, because when I set up those environments, I followed the compliance model to the letter, no shadow access, no unsecured links. They wanted Fort Knox. I gave them Fort Knox with a sarcasm filter. And Fort Knox doesn't open for people who fire the keyholder without a backup plan. I got a text from Dana in finance. Hey, did you change something with the BI pipeline before you left? It's acting weird. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because by the time she hit send, the damage was already metastasizing. The CTO finally ordered a forced rollback from last week's image. That's when things really started to wobble. The rollback partially restored front-end load, but it triggered version mismatches in the database handlers. Logs started logging nothing. The heartbeat skipped like a scratched CD. And still, no one could figure out what the hell was happening because Schedule E wasn't a bug. It was the absence of a bridge. Bridges don't warn you when they're missing until the moment you step off the edge. By nightfall, support calls doubled. Our Australian partners were seeing 502 bad gateway errors. One VP tried blaming AWS. Someone else suggested sabotage, but they didn't need sabotage. They just needed to underestimate what I meant when I told them access isn't about power, it's about trust. And they broke both. The system did what it was designed to do. It stopped answering. By 8:17 a.m. the next day, the platform was fully comatose, no pings, no status lights, the kind of silence that hums in your chest like the moment before a tornado peels the roof off. Customer data queues stacked like unpaid bills. The heartbeat monitor for our core messaging service stopped blinking entirely. By 8:26, Tier 2 support went silent, not because things got fixed, but because the queue of incoming complaints from clients had hit max capacity and auto-muted the Slack channel. At 8:41, the CEO walked into the war room with his tie undone and that permanent sunburn he picked up in Napa, still peeling like bad karma. What the hell is going on? He barked, holding a Starbucks cup like it might contain the solution. The CTO, now visibly sweating through his rayon blend, motioned toward the dashboard, where 6 of the 8 panels were blood red. We've lost sync with the user management system. Backups are stalling. We tried to reroute jobs through the staging pipe, but the token manager won't accept the fallback cert. The CEO blinked. English, Chad. We can't talk to our own platform. The CTO muttered, it doesn't trust us anymore. And he wasn't wrong. Trust was always the foundation. Schedule E didn't shut down services. It revoked the assumption that the people running those services still belonged there. It didn't burn the house down. It just changed the locks and waited to see who tried to break in. At 9:03, someone from PR slapped a paper on the table. It was a public statement from our largest client, one of those razor-sharp Fortune 50 monsters we spent years courting, due to recent unexplained outages and data integrity concerns. We are suspending use of the company's platform until further notice. We are actively exploring alternative partners. The room went silent, then a whisper. Legal's here, and in came Charles, the company lawyer who always smelled like wool and disappointment. He sat down without a word, opened a black folder, and began flipping through printed PDFs. He was 2 pages in when he stopped, read something, then read it again. Then he slowly lifted his eyes and said, "Anyone deactivate the root-level access tokens before she left?" Nobody answered. He leaned forward. "Let me rephrase. When you terminated the senior system architect without cause, did anyone initiate the standard offboarding protocol for full access users?" Still silence. He closed the folder, placed it on the table like a loaded gun, and said flatly, "You have a Schedule E contingency activated." He flipped to a highlighted section in my termination paperwork. There was no documentation transfer, no access recovery procedure initiated, and no legal review of her security role. The CEO swallowed. "What's Schedule E?" Chad rubbed his forehead like a migraine was clawing out of his skull. "It's a trust access framework she built last year." "I thought we shelved it." "No," said Charles. "It was quietly approved under the Q3 patch notes. I signed off on the compliance review myself. Its intent was to prevent internal compromise in case of unauthorized personnel access." He looked up. "You just fired the one person the system believes is authorized." The CEO's jaw flexed. "Well, can't we override it?" "Not without her." Silence again, this time thicker, like the air itself didn't want to be involved. From my couch, I watched a clip from a tech reporter's live stream. He was speculating, incorrectly but charmingly, that the outage might be related to a regional CDN failure. Cute. I wasn't watching to gloat. I wasn't watching to savor the panic. I needed to know the system was behaving exactly as I'd written it. And it was. Every subsystem that relied on personal trust tokens had revoked its handshake. Every queue that needed my signature to initiate fallback was paused in perfect stasis. No corruption, no collapse, just a machine with its hands folded, waiting to see if anyone remembered how to knock. They didn't. By noon, the war room smelled like anxiety and stale espresso. The CTO suggested brute-forcing access through an emergency shell. Legal immediately vetoed it. That would constitute tampering with an architect-level failover. If she documented this, which she usually does, it's likely timestamped, notarized, and legally protected. The CEO slammed his fist on the table. "So what? We just wait." Charles didn't blink. "You're going to contact her and you're going to pray she picks up." Outside the tinted glass of the war room, the rest of the office kept buzzing, emails bouncing, sales teams sweating, support staff lying through their teeth to clients about scheduled maintenance. But inside that room, it was undeniable. They didn't just fire an employee. They cut out the brains and wondered why the body stopped moving. They started with optimism, the kind that dies fast in a server room. The engineers, what was left of them, believed they could fix it. That with enough caffeine, enough duct tape, enough brute force reboots, they could exhume a stable backup and surgically extract whatever I left behind. But Schedule E wasn't buried. It was airlocked. And the first thing they didn't understand was that I never installed it. I wove it. It lived inside legacy versioning scripts marked as deprecated, a shell within a shell, nested in the modules everyone ignored because they thought old meant harmless. They tried restoring from a 3-week-old image. The rollback stalled at 84%, an authentication delay. It was looking for a certificate rotation key that was tied to a human token. Mine. Then they went 2 months back. That one spun up, but the UI layer failed to connect. The new endpoint aliases had been restructured during the last quarterly compliance update, an update I led, documented, and submitted through the company's own damn Jira portal. None of them read it. At 11:37 a.m., the internal audit engine kicked in. I named it Canary, a self-triggering watchdog I built after watching another startup get sued into oblivion because no one flagged outbound data flow after a compliance breach. Canary didn't alert with red lights and sirens. It did what it was designed to do, generate quiet, time-stamped reports, and submit them automatically to legal compliance and the parent company's external audit inbox. It found 14 violations, most of them minor: residual access drift, expired sandbox certs. But one wasn't. A financial data segment for our healthcare client had been sitting in limbo for 19 hours. The encryption timer expired. Per HIPAA compliance, that made it a reportable exposure. By noon, the CFO's face had gone a shade somewhere between ash and mushroom soup. He was pacing outside the war room with his phone pressed so tight to his face it looked like he was trying to breathe through it. "For states," he hissed into the glass. "We're liable in 4 states. Texas is going to crucify us for this." Someone mentioned calling the insurer. Someone else whispered about pre-litigation notice. Inside the engineering pit, it wasn't panic anymore, it was guilt. One of the mid-level analysts, Tina, quiet, sharp, always skipped over in meetings, finally broke the silence. "She warned us," she muttered. 6 months ago. She literally flagged this dependency chain in the Q2 debrief and said we needed to implement dual key access. Nobody responded. Someone finally dug up the old Loom video. There I was, screen sharing, walking through the potential failure modes. My voice was calm, patient, tired. I ended it with, "None of this will matter until it does. But when it does, it'll be a slow bleed. And if I'm not here when it happens, you'll wish I was." The video ended. No one said a word. They tried emailing me. 3 messages in an hour. Subject: clarification request. Subject: platform rollback assistance. Subject: we value your expertise. I didn't open them, not out of vengeance, but because somewhere under the layers of system chaos and boardroom flailing, I felt a dull ache. Not for them, for me. For the version of me that stayed late writing those protocols, for the Saturdays spent whiteboarding rollback logic while Melanie live-posted about wine pairings, for the loyalty I mistook as reciprocal. I'd given this company my stability, my holidays, my belief that competence would always be respected. They traded it for a photo op with a CEO's wife holding a branded cake. So no, I didn't reply. I went for a walk instead, long, slow, through the neighborhood with my phone on silent and my notifications off, because the system was doing exactly what I built it to do. And some ghosts in the stack aren't there to haunt. They're there to remind. It started with false hope. The CTO, now surviving entirely on Red Bull and denial, barked out one last command: full rollback to the pre-Napa build. His theory was simple. If they could just boot a version of the platform from before the Schedule E protocols were active, maybe they could bypass the trust walls altogether. Never mind that I told them repeatedly that Schedule E didn't live in a version. It lived in conditions. At 2:06 p.m., the command was executed. The rollback kicked off with a mechanical whine like a rusty hinge. Monitors flickered. Log windows raced with green code, and for about 20 seconds, someone in QA actually clapped. Then the first node failed to respond, followed by the second. Then the build agent screamed something about unresolved credential linkage and then darkness. Every live service, every data pipeline, every microservice that handled billing, analytics, scheduling, dead. The production environment locked up like a vault mid-robbery. The rollback hadn't restored anything. It had overwritten half-complete failover pathways. I had been documenting the week I was fired, documentation that never made it past my draft folder, documentation that required a second set of tokens to decrypt. Tokens I had legally, ethically revoked upon termination. By 2:14 p.m., the junior engineer, Emily, fresh out of school, sharp but untested, barricaded herself in the third-floor restroom and was sobbing loud enough to echo into the stairwell. She had been tasked with rebuilding the load balancer routing paths. She didn't even know what half the terms in the infrastructure diagram meant. No one had told her that the routing table was dynamic, that it updated every 72 hours using a secure webhook tied to a trust handshake only I could initiate. By 2:30, legal had fully embedded themselves in the war room, suits, ties, eyes like vultures in a burning field. One guy from Risk kept muttering about insurable thresholds like a prayer. The CTO pointed at HR. "You didn't give us enough notice." HR threw up her hands. "You didn't file a transition plan." We assumed you knew what was in her stack. They turned to the CEO, who looked like his $90 haircut had aged 5 years in 5 hours. He blinked at the table, jaw tight. Isn't there a workaround? Silence fell so hard you could hear the HVAC stutter. I imagine that's when they started seriously discussing me, not the sanitized version, the one in the employee file marked termination due to noncompliance, but the real me, the architect, the firewall. The woman who once handwrote a 78-page disaster recovery plan because the cloud migration vendor kept missing SLAs. They thought they could rip me out like a rusty screw, and the machine would just keep humming. Instead, they broke the housing, and now the machine wasn't just off. It was insulted. I was at home, sitting in a cardigan that still smelled faintly like printer toner and peppermint oil, sipping chamomile tea like an old woman on jury duty. I opened my laptop, drafted a quick message subject, Schedule E legal record, to my attorney, attaching the notarized schema for Schedule E, a timestamped, countersigned audit trail that led directly back to the compliance binder in their own documentation repo. Every line of code justified. Every protocol in line with our internal security charter. No malice, no sabotage, just procedure. My lawyer would hold on to it, just in case. Because when the subpoenas came, the first question would be, did she act maliciously? And the answer would be printed, stamped, archived, and laminated if necessary. No. She acted in accordance with the trust boundaries defined by her role. They were the ones who broke trust. I just built the system that noticed. He landed sometime after midnight, private jet, no fanfare, just a retired titan in orthopedic loafers with a vendetta brewing. The founder, the real one, not his son with the podcast voice and wine cave morals. The man who built the company when servers were closets and code was printed out to debug, the kind of guy who still carried a leather day planner and looked at cloud computing like it was witchcraft. Word hit the office like a thunderclap. The old man was back early and not in the mood for spin. He walked in with a raincoat folded over one arm, lips pursed like someone had parked in his spot. Nobody greeted him. Nobody offered coffee. They all just watched, breath held, as he passed the open cubicles and stepped into the war room like a ghost refusing to stay dead. He didn't ask for a slideshow. He didn't want a briefing deck. He looked once at the dashboard with a forest of red status indicators, then calmly asked, "Where's the root logs?" No one moved. He repeated, "The root logs." Who accessed them last? Chad, the CTO, stammered something about restricted visibility and DevOps redundancies. The founder didn't blink, pointed to a chair. "Sit down." He took the printed exit documents off the table and scanned them with military precision. It took less than 30 seconds for his finger to jab the signature line, "My name." He froze, then whispered, "Too quiet for most to hear, you idiots." He turned to his son. "You fired the architect for what?" The CEO tried to explain, something about culture fit, misaligned values, and a disruption to team morale. The founder's voice cut through the room like a cleaver. "She was the system." A silence followed, the kind that dries your mouth and makes you forget how to blink. Then slam. He shut the folder like it had personally offended him, then turned to legal. "Did she sign a non-disparagement?" Charles nodded. "Yes." "Did she break it?" "No." "Did she sabotage us?" "We have no evidence of that." Her schema was submitted, notarized, and compliant with internal standards. The founder nodded once. "Then fix this or start writing settlement checks." He left the room before anyone could speak. I was asleep when the message came in. LinkedIn, the kind of message that buzzes with a different weight, not spam, not an old coworker trying to sell crypto. Just, "Hi, Mr. Callahan would like to speak with you privately. He's available anytime. Please let us know." Signed, Israel, Executive Assistant to F. Callahan. I read it twice. Sat with it. Scrolled back through my inbox, through all the unread pleas, apologies, excuses that came in waves once the system flatlined. I didn't reply to those. But this was different, because Callahan wasn't the kind of man who asked for meetings. If he wanted a performance, he scheduled a boardroom. If he wanted a show of force, he brought lawyers. But a private meeting? That meant he was preparing to rebuild something or bury it. Either way, he'd remembered who built the foundation. The air smelled like lemon pledge and unspoken regret. When I arrived, there was no badge, no sign-in sheet, no plastic visitor pass hanging on a lanyard like a dog tag. Just Callahan, standing at the entrance like a monument in slacks, waiting, holding the door open himself. No security escort this time. No mic with his badge scanner. Just the founder walking beside me through the same lobby I'd been walked out of 6 days earlier like I was radioactive. No words were exchanged as we passed the receptionist, who didn't meet my eyes. Someone in legal flinched when they saw me. I kept walking. He led me to the glass conference room, executive wing, end of the corridor, floor-to-ceiling view of the city, the place where deals got done and heads quietly rolled. We sat. Outside the glass, the CEO lingered like mildew, standing just far enough back that he thought he was invisible, just close enough to remind me he still existed. Callahan leaned forward and folded his hands. "I've been reviewing your logs," he said. I said nothing. Let him fill the silence. "What you built, it wasn't just elegant. It was protective for the company, for the data, for the clients, for us." I waited. No need to help him get there. He continued, voice low, almost reverent. "And what they did, how they handled your exit, was reckless, arrogant, unforgivable." He looked up at me, and it wasn't a performance. His eyes weren't corporate anymore. They were old man eyes, tired, disappointed. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, simple and somehow sincere. He reached into his jacket and slid a folder across the table. Reinstatement offer, new title, Chief Security Architect, equity options, unlimited budget, direct reporting line to the CEO. And then, softly, write your number. I stared at it, the paper, the offer, the apology, and I smiled. Not mockingly, not out of vengeance. Just a quiet, clean smile. "No," I said. He looked confused. No, I've moved on," I said, and the clause was clear. If I'm removed without due process, Schedule E initiates. He nodded. "We know. But surely there must be a way to be stopped." Seeing my face, he paused. "There isn't." Silence. Behind the glass, the CEO shifted uncomfortably, probably wondering if he was still invited to his own board. Callahan sat back. "Then what do we do now?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a small white envelope, no logo, no frills, just clean stationery and a number printed in fountain pen. I slid it across the table. He opened it, blinked, read it again, then exhaled like someone had just handed him the bill for a sin he didn't commit but had to pay anyway. "That's your consulting fee?" "No," I said. "That's my recovery fee. This isn't a salary. This is a lifeboat." He gave a slow, deliberate nod, no arguments, no negotiation, just acceptance. "Can you fix it?" "Yes." "Will you?" I looked at him for a long moment, then at the CEO, still watching, still pretending he was a bystander to a mess he helped create. I turned back to Callahan. "For you," I said, "yes. But not for him. Ink dries fast when it costs 8 figures. No lawyers present, no board vote, no posturing, just Callahan's trembling signature and a nod toward the envelope that now felt heavier than gold. The agreement was airtight. My legal team had it ready within the hour, non-retainable, single-session consulting, full indemnity, no ownership claim. Just one clean transaction, system recovery in exchange for silence, closure. The kind of check that made early retirement feel like a side hobby. They'd asked for 3 days. I gave them 45 minutes. We met in a secured room they'd once used for merger negotiations, no Wi-Fi, no phone signals, just hardwired terminals and a cold bottle of water I didn't touch. I sat down at a machine that still bore my name in a login cookie from 7 updates ago. The keyboard had the same sticky R key I'd never gotten around to fixing. I entered the root access, the one only Schedule E recognized. The terminal blinked once, then opened. From there, it was clean, surgical. I walked through my own architecture like I was navigating an old house in the dark, knowing every creaky step, every soft spot in the floorboards. Rollback wasn't a reset, it was a conversation. And the system still trusted me enough to listen. One by one, nodes came back online. Pipelines flushed. Authentication loops closed. The loggers, silenced for days, coughed back to life and began recording again. At minute 27, the backup queue cleared. At minute 32, the client portals responded. At minute 40, the data integrity audit returned 100% green. At minute 45, the platform fully stabilized. The room didn't erupt in applause. This wasn't a movie. Outside the door, through the reinforced glass, Callahan stood in the hallway, watching as the monitors across the floor flickered from crimson to calm blue. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just watched. Across from him, slumped in a chair like a man who'd finally read the fine print on his own ambition, sat the CEO, sweat haloing through his dress shirt, neck flushed with that particular shade of shame you can't explain to a PR team. I got up and headed for the door. As I passed the CEO, I slowed just enough to lock eyes with him. He tried to speak, but no words came. "You were right," I said, my voice calm and firm. "Family first." I paused for a moment. "But this time, it's my family." His face twitched like I'd tossed the envelope in his face. Then I walked out, no goodbyes, no handshakes, no last glance at the place I poured my heart into. Just the lobby, the elevator, and the doors. Outside, the sky was gentle and gray. The air carried the scent of autumn and fresh starts. I didn't look back. When you leave something that never valued you, there's no need to linger at its grave. You're the true heroes of the corporate grind. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe or I'll flip the switch on those old cubicle days.